long before the great civil war that would fracture the Imperium, before brother turned against brother and the stars themselves seemed to tremble with betrayal, there was an age spoken of in quieter tones, an age of unity, an age of certainty. It was a time known as the Great Crusade. Across the immense darkness of the galaxy, humanity advanced once more, emerging from the long and painful night that had once shattered its civilization. The age of strife had broken the ancient human empire into countless fragments. Worlds that had once communicated freely across the stars were left isolated, drifting in silence for millennia. Some fell into barbarism. Others grew strange and unfamiliar, shaped by alien influence or the slow corruption of the warp. But on Terra, something remarkable had begun. A single figure had risen from the shadows of forgotten history, a being whose origins were whispered about but never fully understood. To his followers, he was simply known as the Emperor of Mankind. Under his leadership, Terra was unified after centuries of brutal conflict. Warlords and tyrants who had once ruled the broken continents were cast down one by one. Ancient technologies, long buried beneath ruined cities and poisoned deserts, were recovered and restored. Slowly, patiently, the foundations of a new galactic empire were constructed. The Emperor did not rule through spectacle or excess. His authority was quiet but absolute. His presence carried a gravity that few could fully describe. Those who stood before him often spoke of a sense of vast purpose, as though the weight of countless futures rested upon his decisions. Yet the Emperor did not intend merely to rule Terra. His ambition reached far beyond the cradle of humanity. He envisioned a united species once more, bound together across the stars by reason, order, and strength. Humanity, in his vision, would no longer drift helplessly through the chaos of the galaxy. It would become the dominant force within it. And so the Great Crusade began. From the shipyards orbiting Terra and Mars, enormous fleets were launched into the void. Vast armadas of warships carried soldiers, diplomats, explorers, and scholars to the farthest reaches of known space. Their mission was simple in principle, though immense in scale. Find the lost worlds of humanity. Bring them back into unity. Some worlds welcomed the Imperium without resistance. On those planets, the arrival of the Imperial fleets was greeted with awe and relief. Ancient legends had spoken of Terra, of a distant homeworld that had once guided humanity across the stars. For many isolated civilizations, the Crusade felt like the return of something long promised. Other worlds were less willing. Some had developed their own rulers, their own beliefs, their own ways of life over thousands of years. To them, the Imperium's demand for unity felt less like salvation and more like conquest. In such cases, the fleets carried another message: compliance. The Imperium would welcome a world peacefully, but it would not tolerate defiance. Entire planetary armies sometimes stood against the advancing forces of the Crusade. Yet few could match the discipline and technological might of the Emperor's armies. At the forefront of those armies marched the legions of Astartes, the Space Marines. Created through methods known only to the Emperor and a handful of his most trusted scientists, these warriors were far beyond ordinary men. They were taller, stronger, and more resilient than any natural human soldier. Their armor turned aside weapons that would devastate conventional troops. Their minds were trained for absolute loyalty and unbreakable resolve. Each legion carried its own character, its own traditions and methods of war, but all served the same purpose: to bring the scattered worlds of humanity into a single Imperium. Alongside them stood the vast host of the Imperial army, millions upon millions of ordinary humans who followed the Crusade fleets across the stars. They built fortresses, governed newly compliant planets, and ensured that Imperial law took root wherever the Emperor's banners were raised. Yet even this immense military power was not the true heart of the Crusade. The Emperor understood that conquest alone could not unite a species. Unity required belief. Across the Imperium, a powerful ideal was spread: the Imperial truth. It was a philosophy that rejected superstition and mysticism. It taught that humanity must rely on reason, science, and collective strength rather than fear of the unknown. In the Emperor's vision, humanity would no longer kneel before imagined gods or ancient myths. It would stand on its own, guided by knowledge and discipline. For many worlds emerging from the long darkness of isolation, this message carried tremendous appeal. The Crusade did not merely conquer planets. It restored them. Ancient archives were reopened. Starports were rebuilt. Trade routes began to flow once more between systems that had been separated for thousands of years. Cultures long cut off from one another began to exchange knowledge and ideas again. Slowly, steadily, the Imperium expanded, sector by sector, system by system. Each year, the borders of human space pushed further outward into the vast and largely unexplored galaxy, and at the center of it all stood the Emperor. Though he rarely appeared in person on distant battlefields, his presence was felt everywhere. His commands guided the fleets. His strategies shaped the direction of the Crusade. His long-term vision stretched across centuries rather than years. Those who had seen him often struggled to explain the experience. Some described him as a towering warrior clad in golden armor, radiant with authority. Others remembered him as a calm and thoughtful ruler who spoke quietly but carried immense conviction in every word. It was said that to meet the Emperor's gaze was to feel completely understood, as though every thought and every doubt had already been weighed. Yet despite this power, the Emperor remained strangely distant. He rarely explained the deeper reasons behind his decisions. His plans extended far beyond what most commanders could fully grasp. This distance did not weaken the Imperium. In fact, it seemed to strengthen it. Across the Crusade fleets, there was a deep and unwavering confidence. Humanity believed it was witnessing the rebirth of its destiny. The long night of isolation and fear had ended, and a new age of order had begun. The stars themselves seemed to open before the Imperium's advance. But the galaxy was vast beyond imagination. Even as the Crusade reclaimed thousands of worlds, there remained countless regions untouched by Imperial light. Strange civilizations, ancient ruins, and forgotten mysteries waited silently in distant sectors. Some discoveries were celebrated. Others were quietly sealed away. Not every world rediscovered by the Crusade was welcomed into the Imperium with triumph and ceremony. Occasionally, Imperial explorers encountered planets whose histories were difficult to explain, places where the past had unfolded in ways that defied the neat order the Imperium sought to impose. In such cases, the Emperor's command could become unusually brief. There are records, scattered through forgotten archives, that speak of certain discoveries during the early decades of the Great Crusade. Fragments of reports written by fleet officers, astropaths, and expedition leaders. Most of these documents are incomplete. Many are heavily censored, but among them appears a recurring phrase, a simple instruction, a command issued with unmistakable authority. The planet was to be erased from all official charts. Its existence would not be discussed. Its name would not be recorded. The Imperium, it seemed, had encountered something it did not wish to remember. And so the order was given. Forget this world. For the vast majority of the Imperium, such commands were never questioned. The Crusade moved relentlessly forward, discovering new systems and integrating new populations into humanity's growing empire. History was written by progress. What was left behind in silence rarely troubled the grand narrative of expansion. Yet somewhere within the endless libraries of the Imperium, fragments of those forgotten reports still remain. Records written by men and women who had witnessed something that did not fit within the Emperor's shining vision for humanity's future. Something strange enough that the Imperium itself chose to look away. And as the fleets of the Great Crusade continued their journey into the darkness between the stars, one quiet truth lingered beneath the triumph and certainty of that golden age. Not every discovery brought glory. Some discoveries brought only silence. And somewhere, drifting in the forgotten regions of the galaxy, there remained a planet whose name had been deliberately removed from the memory of mankind. A world that, by the Emperor's own command, was meant to be forgotten. For now, the Crusade marched onward, its banners bright against the cold emptiness of space, while the countless stars turned slowly in their ancient patterns, and the forgotten world waited, patient and silent, beyond the edges of Imperial light. In the early decades of the Great Crusade, Imperial exploration fleets traveled vast and uncertain routes through regions of space that had been silent since the collapse of humanity's first stellar empire. Navigators followed unstable warp passages, charting new corridors through the Imperium while survey vessels mapped star systems that had not been visited for thousands of years. Each expedition carried a clear purpose: locate human worlds, establish contact, bring them into the expanding Imperium. Most discoveries followed familiar patterns. A long isolated colony might be found orbiting a dim star, its people unaware that humanity had once ruled thousands of systems beyond their sky. Diplomatic envoys would descend from orbit, bearing the authority of terror and the promise of reunification. In many cases, compliance followed quickly, but not all discoveries unfolded so simply. Among the fleets pushing steadily outward was an exploration group attached to one of the Crusade's larger expeditionary armadas. Its task was routine in principle: survey a cluster of distant stars that lay along the outer boundary of newly charted warp routes. The region had once appeared on fragments of ancient stellar maps recovered from pre-Age of Strife archives. Yet those records were incomplete, and the centuries of warp storm that had ravaged the galaxy during the long night had distorted much of the surrounding space. No one expected anything remarkable. When the first survey ships translated from the warp into the system, their instrument confirmed the presence of a stable star and several orbiting planetary bodies. One world in particular immediately drew attention. It was Earth-size, atmosphere, breathable, hydrosphere, stable, biosphere, active. In most circumstances, such a discovery would have been cause for celebration. Worlds capable of sustaining human life were among the most valuable prizes of the Great Crusade. Yet from the beginning, there were irregularities. The first came from the Auspex readings taken from orbit. Long-range scans detected artificial structures across the planet's surface, suggesting the remains of a once-advanced civilization. But the pattern of those structures was unusual. Cities appeared scattered in strangely symmetrical formations, separated by vast regions that showed no signs of habitation. Even more curious was the apparent absence of energy emissions. A functioning human world, even a technologically modest one, typically produced detectable signals, communication transmissions, power grids, orbital traffic. This planet was silent. Still, the possibility remained that the civilization below had regressed during the long centuries of isolation. Such outcomes were not uncommon in the aftermath of the Age of Strife. To determine the truth, the expedition commander authorized a standard reconnaissance descent. A small shuttle craft entered the planet's atmosphere, carrying a survey team composed of Imperial Army officers, technical specialists, and a single representative of the Mechanicum of Mars. Their mission was simple: confirm the status of the world and determine whether contact could be established with any surviving population. The shuttle landed near the edge of one of the detected urban complexes. From orbit, the city had appeared largely intact. Towers and wide avenues had suggested a once-thriving metropolis. But as the survey team stepped onto the silent streets, the true nature of the place became clear. The city was abandoned. Buildings stood untouched by warfare or natural disaster. Roads remained clear of debris. Even the structural integrity of the architecture seemed remarkably well preserved. Yet there were no inhabitants, no movement, no signs of life. The team advanced cautiously through the empty avenues, their boots echoing faintly against smooth stone surfaces that had not known human footsteps for an unknown span of time. Inside the buildings, they discovered further signs of former habitation. Furnishings remained in place. Tools and instruments lay where they had last been used. In several structures, entire rooms appeared frozen in the middle of ordinary daily activity. But there were no bodies, no remains, no explanation for the sudden absence of the population that had once lived there. The Mechanicum adept accompanying the team began conducting detailed scans of the surrounding infrastructure. Preliminary analysis suggested that the city had once possessed technological capabilities comparable to early Imperial standards. Power systems, transportation networks, data storage systems, all of it now inactive. More troubling still was the discovery that every central data archive within the city had been deliberately erased. Not damaged, erased. Entire libraries of historical records had been wiped clean with extraordinary precision. Whatever civilization had flourished here had removed its own history before vanishing. Over the following days, additional survey teams explored other regions of the planet. The pattern repeated everywhere they traveled. Cities without people, facilities without records, infrastructure preserved but silent. It became increasingly clear that the disappearance of the planet's population had not been caused by war, plague, or natural catastrophe. The evidence pointed towards something else: a departure. Yet no starships remained in orbit. No launch facilities showed signs of mass evacuation. There were no orbital stations, no debris fields, no evidence that a planetary fleet had ever existed in sufficient numbers to transport an entire population into space. The people of this world had vanished, but they had not left. When these findings were transmitted back to the orbiting fleet, the expedition's senior commanders began compiling a formal report for transmission to higher Imperial authorities. Under normal circumstances, such a mystery would have attracted considerable scientific interest. The Imperium scholars and historians would have studied the ruins carefully, seeking to understand the fate of this lost human colony. But before those studies could begin, a message arrived. It came through the astropathic choir assigned to the fleet. The signal carried the unmistakable authority of terror. The command was brief. The world was to be placed under immediate quarantine. All further exploration was to cease. All collected data was to be transferred to encrypted archives and sealed. The system itself will be removed from active navigation charts. The final line of the order contained no explanation, only a directive. This planet was not to be remembered. And from that moment onward, every officer within the expeditionary fleet understood that they had encountered something the Imperium did not wish to acknowledge. Something that, by decree of the highest authority in human space, would be forgotten. The order from Terra arrived without ceremony, yet its authority was unmistakable. Within the structured hierarchy of the Great Crusade, commands originating from the throne world carried absolute weight. Fleets spanning thousands of star systems obeyed such directives without hesitation, trusting that the Emperor's vision extended far beyond the limited perspective of any single commander. Still, within the quiet corridors of the expeditionary flagship, the message created an atmosphere of unease. The officers responsible for the discovery of the silent world had expected instructions for further investigation. The ruins alone represented an extraordinary archaeological find. A human civilization that had erased its own history before disappearing entirely was a mystery that would normally draw the attention of scholars, remembrancers, and the mechanicum alike. Instead, they had received a command of unusual finality. Quarantine the world, seal all records, erase the system from navigational charts. And most striking of all, the message had not passed through the many administrative layers that usually separated the fleets of the Crusade from the distant government on Terra. It had arrived swiftly and directly, delivered through astropathic channels reserved for the highest levels of authority. Such communication routes were rarely used. They were typically reserved for strategic directives that affected entire sectors of the Crusade. Yet this message concerned only a single, isolated planet. Even so, the expedition commander wasted little time in carrying out the order. Within hours, all survey teams were recalled from the surface. Shuttles lifted from the silent cities and returned to orbit, leaving the abandoned streets exactly as they had been found. Sensor satellites placed around the planet during the initial exploration were deactivated and recovered. One by one, the mechanisms of investigation were dismantled. A perimeter was established around the world. Naval patrol craft began maintaining a quiet watch over the system while technicians aboard the flagship gathered every fragment of information that had been recorded during the brief period of exploration. Visual recordings, geological scans, environmental data, personal logs from the survey teams. All of it was transferred into restricted archives under the supervision of senior fleet officers. The next step was the alteration of the fleet's navigational records. Every Imperial vessel maintained detailed star charts that recorded known warp routes and positions of significant systems. These charts were essential for the continued expansion of the Crusade. Navigators relied upon them to plot safe passages through the shifting tides of the Imperium. Now, those records were quietly changed. The star system containing the silent world was removed from standard charts and marked only within a small number of encrypted files. Future expeditions traveling through the region would find no indication that a habitable planet had ever been discovered there. In time, even the fleet's own personnel would no longer encounter its name. For most of the crew, the matter ended there. The routines of the Great Crusade allowed little space for lingering curiosity. Fleets moved constantly from one campaign to the next, reclaiming worlds and establishing imperial rule across the galaxy. New discoveries quickly replaced old ones. Yet among those who had walked the empty cities, the memory did not fade so easily. Members of the original survey teams returned to their duties carrying a quiet awareness that something about the planet remained unexplained. Their reports had documented every observable detail with precision, but the central mystery remained untouched. An entire population had vanished, not through violence, not through natural disaster, but through an absence that left no trace of its cause. Some attempted to reason through the possibilities. Perhaps the inhabitants had possessed advanced technologies capable of removing themselves from the planet in ways that left little evidence behind. Perhaps the data archives had been erased to conceal a failed experiment or some internal catastrophe that the civilization had chosen not to preserve. Such theories were discussed briefly, then set aside. The Emperor's command had been clear. There would be no further investigation. Weeks later, a second astropathic message arrived from Terra. Unlike the first, this one was not addressed solely to the expedition commander. It was distributed to several senior figures within the Crusade's expanding administrative structure. The directive was simple. All personnel involved in the discovery of the quarantined world were to submit their personal records and mission logs for review. No reason was provided. Compliance, however, was immediate. Within days, entire collections of documents were transferred into sealed archives overseen by Imperial authorities attached to the fleet. Some files were copied and transmitted back toward Terra through encrypted astropathic relays. Others simply disappeared from the ship's central data systems. For the men and women who had witnessed the silent cities, the effect was subtle but unmistakable. Official recognition of their discovery gradually dissolved. Reports that had once circulated among fleet command staff were replaced with revised versions that contained no mention of the planet at all. Expedition summaries described routine surveys of unremarkable systems. The world itself ceased to exist within the Imperium's formal records. Only memory remained. And memory, within the machinery of the Great Crusade, was a fragile thing. Years could pass quickly as fleets advanced deeper into unexplored regions of the galaxy. Campaigns demanded constant attention. New wars, new negotiations, and new discoveries filled the daily lives of those who served the Imperium. Gradually, even among the survey teams, the strange world became a subject rarely spoken of, not because it had been forgotten entirely, but because it had been quietly placed among the many uncertainties that accompanied life at the frontier of human expansion. Beyond the ordered systems of the Imperium lay vast regions where the unknown still dominated. Ancient alien ruins, strange phenomena within the warp, and the remnants of lost human cultures were encountered regularly by the Crusade's explorers. Most mysteries eventually found explanations. Some did not, and occasionally, as the fleet commanders had now learned, the Imperium itself chose not to pursue those explanations. Far away, on Terra, the Emperor continued to guide the Great Crusade with patient precision. His vision for humanity stretched across the centuries, shaping a future in which the scattered fragments of the species would stand united once more. If the discovery of a silent world had reached his attention, and few doubted that it had, then its significance must have touched upon plans far larger than any single expedition could understand. The Crusade would move forward. New stars awaited. New worlds would be reclaimed. Yet somewhere in the darkness behind them, a quiet system remained under watch, its solitary planet turning slowly beneath the light of an ordinary star. The empty city still stood. The erased archives still waited in silence. And whatever truth had once lived on that world remained hidden, locked behind the Emperor's command that the Imperium itself must forget. After the order of silence had been given, the expeditionary fleet resumed its place within the vast machinery of the Great Crusade. The quarantine system remained behind them, marked only within a handful of restricted coordinates known to a very small circle of Imperial authorities. To most within the Armada, the event faded into the background of countless other discoveries made during the relentless expansion of human space. Yet time has a curious way of preserving certain questions. Among the officers who had overseen the initial exploration of the silent world, the memory remained persistent, not openly discussed, and certainly never recorded again in official logs, but carried quietly within the thoughts of those who had seen the abandoned cities with their own eyes. For one senior cartographer attached to the fleet's navigation corps, the puzzle lingered longer than most. His duties were routine in principle. Imperial cartographers maintained the star charts that allowed the fleets of the Crusade to travel safely through the galaxy. Each system discovered was carefully mapped, its stellar coordinates measured against known warp currents, gravitational signatures, and the complex patterns of the Imperium. These maps were not merely guides. They were the expanding outline of humanity's restored empire. During a standard review of archived stellar data, the cartographer noticed something unusual within the historical records of the region where the silent world had once appeared. The system itself had been erased from active charts exactly as the Emperor's command had instructed. That part was expected. What drew his attention was something more subtle. Older fragments of pre-Age of Strife navigation data suggested that the region had once been a minor but stable transit corridor. Long before the Great Crusade, human vessels had apparently passed through this sector with some regularity. That alone was not surprising. Ancient human exploration had once stretched across vast areas of the galaxy, but the deeper he examined those fragments, the stranger the pattern became. Several surrounding systems recorded in the old charts appeared to have undergone dramatic environmental shifts during the centuries of warp instability that marked the Age of Strife. Stellar radiation levels had changed. Planetary atmospheres had collapsed or transformed. Entire colonies had vanished. Yet the Silent World, based on the scans taken during the fleet's brief investigation, appeared almost untouched by those galactic upheavals. Its environment remained stable. Its cities remained intact. Even its infrastructure, though inactive, showed remarkably little sign of decay. It was as though time had passed differently there. The cartographer considered recording his observations within a formal report. Such discrepancies were normally forwarded to the Mechanicum for further study. Understanding the long-term evolution of planetary systems was an important aspect of Imperial scientific research, but the memory of the Emperor's command returned to him. Forget this world. He closed the archive and returned to his duties. Far above the silent planet, the Imperial patrol ships assigned to maintain quarantine continued their quiet watch. Their orders were simple: observe the system and prevent an authorized approach by any passing vessels. For months, nothing changed. The star burned steadily at the center of the system. The abandoned world rotated beneath its thin cloud layers. The ruins remained undisturbed. Yet deep within the Auspex logs maintained by the patrol craft, occasional irregularities began to appear. At first, they were subtle enough to be dismissed as sensor fluctuations. Small distortions in gravitational readings, brief echoes within long-range scans that vanished before they could be clearly identified. Such anomalies were not uncommon in frontier regions where warp currents sometimes interacted unpredictably with local space. Still, the patrol captains kept careful records. Weeks later, one of the monitoring stations detected a signal unlike any they had previously encountered. It did not resemble a standard communication transmission. There were no recognizable patterns of language, no structured bursts of data. Instead, the signal appeared as a slow, repeating fluctuation within the planet's own electromagnetic field. The origin point traced directly to the surface. More precisely, to one of the abandoned cities that the survey teams had explored during the first expedition. The patrol command staff reviewed the data carefully. If any technological systems on the surface had somehow reactivated, the situation would normally justify renewed investigation. A functioning installation might contain valuable historical records or advanced technologies worth recovering, but the quarantine order remained in place. The Emperor's directive had not been rescinded. After several hours of deliberation, the patrol commander chose a cautious approach. Automated observation drones were deployed into the upper atmosphere of the planet, programmed to gather additional sensor data while remaining at a safe altitude. The drones descended silently through the thin layers of cloud. From their distant vantage point, the ruins of the city appeared exactly as they had during the first exploration. Long avenues stretched between towering structures. Empty plazas lay undisturbed beneath the pale light of the system's star. Nothing moved, nothing lived, yet the instrument aboard the drone confirmed the earlier readings. Something beneath the city was active, not across the entire settlement, but concentrated within a specific region near its geometric center. Deep scans indicated faint energy signatures far below the surface, far deeper than the levels previously explored by the survey teams. The patrol commander transmitted the findings to Fleet Command along with a request for updated instructions. Hours passed before the reply arrived. The message carried the same cold clarity as the original directive from Terra. No landing parties were to be deployed. No attempt was to be made to access the subsurface structures. All observation data was to be forwarded immediately through secure astropathic channels. The patrol fleet would maintain its watch, and the world itself would remain undisturbed. Within the silent city, far beneath the empty streets and forgotten towers, something continued to stir slowly within the depths of the planet. Its signals moved like faint echoes through layers of ancient stone and buried architecture. Above it, the stars turned quietly across the void, and the fleets of the Great Crusade pressed onward into new territories, reclaiming the scattered domains of humanity. Yet behind them, In a system removed from every official map, the Forgotten World continued its patient orbit. The Emperor had ordered that it be erased from memory. But some mysteries do not disappear so easily. Sometimes they wait, silent, hidden, listening beneath the surface of history itself. The patrol fleet assigned to watch over the quarantine system continued its quiet duty with the patience that defined much of the Imperium's early expansion. In the immense scale of the Great Crusade, entire decades could pass without significant change in a single region of space. Star systems turned in their silent orbits, and distant expeditions moved steadily onward, leaving only small garrisons behind to guard what had already been claimed. However, the task was not to guard a conquest. It was to guard a silence. The discovery of energy activity beneath the abandoned city had introduced an uncertainty that none of the station officers could fully resolve. Their instructions remained strict: observe only, interfere in no way, and maintain quarantine. For many months after the deployment of the observation drones, the strange signal continued to pulse slowly through the planet's electromagnetic field. It did not increase in strength, nor did it fade away. Instead, it remained steady, repeating at long intervals as though following a pattern too vast or too slow for immediate understanding. The drones maintained their distant positions within the upper atmosphere, orbiting slowly while their instruments recorded every fluctuation. They captured detailed scans of the ruined city, transmitting streams of information back to the patrol vessels above. Yet nothing visible changed on the surface. The long avenues remained empty. The towers remained silent. The wind moved gently through abandoned structures that had not known human presence in centuries. But deep beneath the ground, the energy signatures persisted. When the latest set of data reached the flagship of the patrol fleet, its commanding officers assembled to review the findings alongside representatives of the Mechanicum assigned to oversee technical analysis. The Mechanicum adepts approached the readings with their usual methodical precision. Their instruments filtered the signals, isolating patterns that might indicate machinery or power systems hidden beneath the crust of the planet. Gradually, a conclusion began to form. The activity did not resemble the operation of any known human technology. The energy source appeared ancient. Its emissions fluctuated in ways that did not correspond with standard generators, reactors, or communication arrays used by Imperial or pre-Imperial civilizations. Instead, the pattern suggested something far older, perhaps buried beneath the city long before the colony had even been founded. This raised an unsettling possibility. The human civilization that had once inhabited the planet may not have built the deepest structures beneath their world. They may only have discovered them. The Mechanicum adept prepared a detailed report summarizing their findings. According to their analysis, the signals originated from a complex network of subterranean chambers extending kilometers beneath the surface. These chambers formed a structure far larger than the ruins above. It resembled an enormous buried installation, but its purpose remained impossible to determine. As required by protocol, the report was transmitted through secure channels to higher authorities within the Crusade command structure. From there, it would eventually travel across the vast distances of the Imperium toward Terra itself. While awaiting a response, the patrol fleet continued its observations. The drones were gradually adjusted into lower orbits, though they remained high enough to comply with the prohibition against surface contact. Their sensors began mapping the underground structure in greater detail. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. The buried complex extended outward from the center of the abandoned city in a symmetrical pattern that mirrored the layout of the streets above. It was as though the city had been constructed deliberately around something that had existed long before the first human settlers arrived. Further scans revealed passages and chambers that stretched far beyond the city's limits, reaching into the surrounding wilderness beneath mountains and plains. Whatever lay beneath the world was immense, and it was awake. Not awake in the sense of active machinery or deliberate communication. The energy patterns did not resemble purposeful signals. Instead, they pulsed slowly, like the distant rhythm of something continuing a process that had begun ages ago. Above this hidden activity, the surface civilization had flourished for an unknown span of time. Then, at some point, its people had erased their records and vanished. The officers reviewing the data found themselves returning again and again to that final mystery. Why had the inhabitants chosen to destroy their own history? Why leave their cities untouched yet abandon them completely? The simplest explanation remained the most troubling. They had learned something that convinced them to leave everything behind. Months passed before a new directive arrived. As before, the message came through astropathic transmission bearing the unmistakable authority of Terra. It was brief, direct, and entirely consistent with the Emperor's earlier command. The quarantine would remain permanent. The patrol fleet was to continue observing the system indefinitely. All new data regarding the underground activity would be forwarded to restricted archives. But no attempt would ever be made to access the buried complex. No excavation, no landing parties, no interference. The final instruction repeated the same principle that had guided every decision since the planet's discovery. The world would remain forgotten. To those who read the message, the implication was unmistakable. Somewhere within the highest circles of the Imperium, the nature of the buried structure had already been understood, or at least suspected, and whatever that understanding might be, it had led to the same conclusion. Some knowledge was better left undisturbed, and so the patrol fleet remained in its distant orbit, watching the silent planet turn slowly beneath its fading cities. Far below the empty streets, beyond the reach of sunlight and untouched by the passage of centuries, the ancient installation continued its quiet operation. Its energy pulses moved through the stone like the steady ticking of a clock that had been counting the years since before humanity ever reached the stars. Above it, history moved forward. The Great Crusade expanded into new frontiers. Worlds were conquered, united, and transformed into loyal provinces of the Imperium. But behind that shining expansion, in a system erased from every chart, something older than the Imperium itself continued its patient work beneath forgotten foundations. And no one was meant to remember that it was there. Years passed within the quiet isolation of the quarantine system. In most regions touched by the Great Crusade, change came swiftly. Fleets arrived, battles were fought, treaties were signed, and within a short span of years the banners of the Imperium were raised above newly compliant worlds. Cities expanded, industries grew, and humanity's presence reshaped entire star systems. However, almost nothing changed. The patrol fleet maintained its patient orbit around the forgotten star, carrying out the Emperor's directive with disciplined consistency. Ships rotated in and out of assignment as decades of the Crusade advanced, yet the mission itself remained constant. The system was to be watched, but never disturbed. Among the officers who served within that quiet perimeter, the story of the silent world gradually became known through whispered fragments of archived reports and personal recollections. Though official record contained almost no mention of the planet, memory persisted among those tasked with guarding its existence. Each new commander received the same instructions upon assuming duty: observe the world, record all changes, interfere with nothing, and above all else, maintain the silence that had been decreed from Terra. The observation drones placed within the upper atmosphere continued their endless circuits above the abandoned cities. Their sensors gathered day after day, year after year, transmitting streams of measurements back to the patrol vessels in orbit. The strange energy pulses beneath the planet's surface had not ceased. They had not grown stronger, but they had not weakened either. Their rhythm continued with the same slow regularity first recorded during the earliest days of the quarantine. Each pulse rose gradually through the planet's electromagnetic field before fading once more into quiet stillness. Mechanicum Adept Station within the fleet studied the readings with careful attention. Their analyses filled entire volumes of technical reports, though none of those documents ever reached public archives. The Adept agreed on one conclusion with growing certainty. The buried installation beneath the city was not merely ancient. It was unimaginably old. By comparing the structure's energy patterns with known geological data from the planet itself, they estimated that the complex had existed long before the arrival of the human colony that built the cities above it. In fact, the installation might have been active even before the earliest stages of human interstellar exploration, perhaps even longer. The possibility raised questions that none of the adepts were fully comfortable addressing. Human civilization had once believed itself to be among the galaxy's earliest spacefaring species. Though alien empires certainly existed, few were known to possess technology vastly older than humanity's own long-lost golden age. Yet the structure beneath the forgotten world seemed to belong to a far more distant era. Who had built it, and why had it been placed beneath a planet that later became home to a human colony? These questions remained unanswered. The Mechanicum's reports were forwarded through secure channels as required, disappearing into restricted archives beyond the reach of ordinary scholars. From time to time, updated directives arrived from Terra confirming that the quarantine would remain unchanged. The Emperor's command endured. Still, time itself continued to leave its mark upon the silent world. The abandoned cities, though remarkably well preserved, slowly began to show the subtle effects of centuries without maintenance. Weather patterns shifted across the planet's surface, and occasional storms passed through the empty streets. Wind and rain gradually eroded exposed structures. Glass shattered, stone cracked. Vegetation, once carefully managed by the vanished inhabitants, began to spread through the silent districts. Trees grew along former avenues. Vines crept across the walls of abandoned towers. Small ecosystems developed in courtyards and plazas where nothing had lived before. The planet was slowly reclaiming the works of its lost civilization. Yet even as the surface changed, the deeper signals remained constant. Far below the ground, the buried complex continued its steady cycle of energy pulses. Some among the Mechanicum proposed that the installation might be performing a function tied to the planet itself. Perhaps it was regulating geological stability, maintaining atmospheric balance, or controlling some deeper planetary mechanism. Others suspected something far stranger. The symmetry of the underground chambers suggested design on an enormous scale, far larger than anything necessary for simple planetary maintenance. The installation resembled not a machine serving the world above, but a system operating according to its own purpose entirely. What that purpose might be remained unknown. Occasionally, the patrol fleet sensors detected slight variations in the pattern of the pulses. These changes were minor, barely perceptible shifts in timing or intensity, but they were recorded carefully nonetheless. Each alteration raised the same quiet question. Was the system beneath the planet slowly changing? Or had it always followed a pattern too vast for human observers to fully understand? From the perspective of the Imperium's expanding empire, the forgotten system occupied almost no space within the greater story of the Great Crusade. Thousands of other worlds demanded attention. Entire sectors were being brought into compliance. Massive campaigns unfolded across distant regions of the galaxy. Against such events, the silent orbit of a single patrol fleet seemed insignificant. Yet the officers stationed there understood that their duty held a different kind of importance. They were not guarding a frontier. They were guarding a mystery. And mysteries, within the vast and ancient galaxy, could sometimes hold consequences far beyond the understanding of those who first encountered them. Far away, the Imperium continued its rise toward what many believed would be an age of permanent unity and order. The Emperor's vision guided humanity steadily forward, restoring connections between lost worlds and rebuilding a civilization that had once nearly vanished. But behind that triumph, hidden from history and erased from every map, the forgotten planet continued its silent turning beneath the stars. Its ruined cities faded slowly into wilderness. Its buried structure pulsed with ancient energy. And somewhere deep within the stone foundations of that world, an unseen process continued, patient, methodical, and entirely indifferent to the rise and fall of human empires. The Imperium had chosen to forget, but time itself had not. As the decades of the Great Crusade continued to unfold across the galaxy, the silent system remained an anomaly within the grand expansion of the Imperium. Fleets traveled past entire regions of space that had once been unknown, carrying the banners of Terra ever farther into the darkness between the stars. Worlds once isolated were brought back into humanity's growing domain, their populations folded into the structure of imperial rule. But the forgotten world remained untouched. The patrol fleet assigned to its watch had changed many times over the years. Ships rotated through the duty as part of the vast logistical structure that sustained the Crusade. Crews completed their tours and moved onward to new assignments across distant battlefronts and exploration zones. Yet each replacement fleet received the same quiet briefing upon arrival. The system they now guarded did not appear on any standard Imperial chart. Its existence was classified within restricted archives. No vessel was permitted to approach the planet's surface. And most importantly, the reason for the quarantine would not be discussed beyond the essential operational facts. For many officers, the assignment was initially met with confusion. The Great Crusade was an age defined by movement, conquest, and discovery. Entire sectors of the galaxy were being reclaimed each year. To stand watch over a single silent planet seemed, at first glance, like an unusual use of valuable naval resources. But those who studied the archived reports soon understood that the system held a unique significance. The underground structure beneath the abandoned city continued its steady rhythm, unchanged by the passage of time. The energy pulses were still recorded with the same patient regularity that had been first observed decades earlier. Their timing varied slightly over long intervals, yet the overall pattern remained consistent. To the Mechanicum adept assigned to the patrol fleet, the signals represented an enduring puzzle. Over the years, they had developed increasingly detailed models of the buried installation, using the data gathered by atmospheric drones and orbital scanners. The subterranean network of chambers and conduits appeared vast beyond ordinary engineering scales. It extended for hundreds of kilometers beneath the crust of the planet. And still, the scans had not reached its deepest layers. Every attempt to map the lowest portions of the structure encountered interference from unknown sources of energy, as though some internal mechanism actively distorted the probing signals. This limitation did not diminish the Mechanicum's curiosity. On the contrary, it strengthened their belief that the complex represented something far beyond the technological traditions of humanity's past. The adept spoke of it cautiously, always mindful of the Emperor's command that the world itself must remain undisturbed. Still, among their private discussions, certain possibilities were occasionally considered. Perhaps the installation had been constructed by a civilization that existed long before the rise of mankind. Perhaps it had been placed deliberately beneath the planet as part of some ancient network whose purpose had been lost to time. Or perhaps the structure had always been there, older than any known record of the galaxy's inhabited history. None of these theories could be confirmed, and none were ever included in official reports. The Imperium did not encourage speculation when clear orders had already been given. Above the quiet surface of the world, the observation drones continued their endless cycles through the upper atmosphere. Their systems had been upgraded several times as new technologies became available through the progress of the Crusade. Each generation of drones carried more advanced sensors, capable of detecting finer details within the planet's electromagnetic field and deeper layers of the subterranean complex. Yet every improvement produced the same essential conclusion. The buried installation remained active, it remained ancient, and it remained beyond understanding. Meanwhile, the surface of the planet continued its slow transformation. Nature moved steadily across the abandoned cities, reclaiming the structures left behind by the vanished human civilization. Forests spread through the empty districts, their roots pushing through streets that had once carried the movement of countless lives. Wildlife, drawn from the planet's surviving ecosystems, gradually expanded into regions that had once been carefully managed urban environments. The city that had first drawn the attention of the expeditionary fleet no longer appeared as a clear geometric pattern when viewed from orbit. Vegetation had grown thick across its plazas and avenues, softening the sharp lines of its architecture. Only the tallest towers still rose clearly above the spreading canopy. To an observer unfamiliar with the planet's history, the ruins might now resemble the remnants of an ancient civilization lost in natural decline rather than a world abruptly abandoned. Time was slowly rewriting the surface story, but beneath the soil and stone, the deepest story continued unchanged. The energy pulses still moved through the planet's magnetic field like distant echoes, steady, unhurried, as though the buried structure operated according to a schedule measured not in years, but in epochs. The patrol fleet recorded every signal carefully. All data was transmitted through encrypted channels to restricted archives maintained by Imperial authorities far beyond the system itself. Somewhere within the vast bureaucratic machinery of the Imperium, scholars and analysts continued to study those records. Yet no new orders ever arrived. The Emperor's command remained exactly as it had been delivered during the earliest days of the discovery. The world would remain forgotten. And so the watch continued. Generations of officers would come and go within the silent orbit of the system. Ships would age and be replaced. Technologies would advance as the Imperium expanded across ever larger portions of the galaxy. But the patrol itself would endure. For somewhere beneath the forest that now covered the abandoned cities, an ancient machine continued its patient operation, untouched by the passage of centuries. And the Imperium, guided by a command that few fully understood, would remain standing guard over a secret that the galaxy itself seemed determined to keep hidden. Centuries within the Imperium often passed in a slow and measured rhythm, especially in places far removed from the shifting fronts of the Great Crusade. For the patrol fleets assigned to the Forgotten System, time did not feel like the rapid march of conquest that defined the Imperium's expansion. Instead, it moved with the quiet persistence of the stars themselves. Ships arrived. Ships departed. Generations of officers rotated through the watch. Yet the planet below remained constant. From orbit, the world appeared peaceful. Its oceans reflected the distant light of the system's sun, and broad cloud formations drifted across the atmosphere in slow currents. The forests that had gradually overtaken the abandoned cities had grown dense and wide, covering much of the land that had once been shaped by human hands. The transformation had reached a point where the original structures were no longer immediately visible from high orbit. Only the careful analysis of orbital scans revealed the hidden geometry beneath the spreading wilderness. Where straight avenues had once cut through the city, lines of older stone still lay buried beneath trees and soil. Where towers had once stood untouched by time, broken silhouettes now rose above the canopy, partially collapsed under centuries of weather and quiet erosion. Nature had begun to erase the final visible traces of the civilization that had vanished. But the deeper mystery remained untouched. The ancient installation beneath the planet continued to operate with the same steady rhythm it had maintained since the earliest recordings. The energy pulses still rose through the electromagnetic field at measured intervals, repeating patterns that the Mechanicum had spent decades attempting to decode. At first, those pulses had seemed random. Later analysis revealed that they were anything but. A senior adept assigned to the patrol fleet's research vessel had spent many years studying the long-term signal archives. He compared thousands of recorded pulses, aligning them against astronomical cycles, stellar radiation fluctuations, and even distant warp disturbances that occasionally rippled through the sector. Slowly, a possibility began to emerge. The pulses followed a pattern, not a simple mechanical repetition, but a sequence tied to events far beyond the planet itself. The timing of the signals appeared to correspond with subtle gravitational changes occurring across neighboring star systems. At first, the correlation seemed too weak to hold meaning. But as more decades of data accumulated, the relationship grew clearer. The installation beneath the forgotten world appeared to be responding to movements within the surrounding region of space. It was as though the buried machine was aware of the galaxy around it. The adept presented his findings carefully, aware that any interpretation touching upon the deeper purpose of the structure approached the limits of the Emperor's command. His report avoided speculation, focusing only on the measurable relationships between the signals and the shifting gravitational patterns. Even so, the implications were impossible to ignore. If the installation truly responded to stellar movement across multiple systems, then its design operated on a scale far larger than the planet it inhabited. It was not simply maintaining local conditions. It was observing something, perhaps measuring, perhaps adjusting. No one could say with certainty. The patrol fleet forwarded the report through secure astropathic channels, as all such discoveries required. The message passed through layers of Imperial command until it vanished into the distant archives maintained under Terra's authority. The response, when it arrived many months later, contained no discussion of the findings. The instructions were unchanged. Continue observation. Maintain quarantine. Do not interfere. For the officers and adepts stationed in the system, the message carried a quiet meaning. Whatever the buried structure was doing, the Imperium had already decided that understanding it was less important than leaving it alone. Above the planet's surface, the observation drones continued their endless circuits. Many had been replaced several times over the centuries, each new generation equipped with improved sensors capable of detecting ever finer variations in the electromagnetic field. Yet even the most advanced instruments could not penetrate the deepest layers of the underground complex. Something within those depths interfered with every attempt to scan further. It was not an active defense. There were no weapon signatures, no sudden burst of power. Instead, the distortion resembled a natural barrier, as though the structure itself had been built with materials or energies that defied ordinary measurement. The Mechanicum recorded the interference carefully, but their conclusions remained cautious. Ancient technologies sometimes produce effects that appeared mysterious simply because their design principles had been lost. Still, the deeper one examined the forgotten world, the more it seemed to belong to a chapter of galactic history that no surviving civilization fully remembered. Meanwhile, beyond the boundaries of the quarantine system, the Imperium continued its immense journey through the stars. The Great Crusade advanced steadily, bringing thousands of human worlds back into unity. Entire sectors once lost to isolation were now governed under Imperial authority, their populations contributing soldiers, resources, and knowledge to the growing empire. From that perspective, the silent system represented almost nothing. One small star among billions. One forgotten planet among countless others. Yet within the patrol fleet that guarded its orbit, there was a growing awareness that their quiet assignment might hold a significance far greater than its outward appearance suggested. They were watching something ancient, something patient, something that had already endured through ages long before humanity reached the stars. And whatever purpose it served, that purpose continued to unfold beneath the forests and ruins of the abandoned world. Its pulses moved through the magnetic field with calm regularity, slow, measured, precise, like the ticking of a clock built to mark the passage of entire eras. Above it, the stars shifted slowly across the galaxy's spiral arms, and the Imperium of man continued its rise toward a destiny few could fully comprehend. But far from the triumphs and victories of the Crusade, the forgotten planet remained exactly where it had always been, silent, watching, and waiting beneath the endless turning of the stars. For many years after the discovery of the pattern beneath the forgotten world, the patrol fleet continued its watch with the same quiet discipline that had defined the mission since the beginning. The officers who commanded the ships understood that their role was not one of exploration or conquest, but of patience. They observed, they recorded, and they waited. The ancient pulses beneath the planet continued their slow rhythm, rising through the magnetic field and fading again into silence. The Mechanicum adepts who studied the signal archives had grown accustomed to its steady presence. It had become almost like the background breathing of the world itself. Yet the galaxy was never entirely still. Across the distant reaches of the Imperium, the Great Crusade continued to expand. Entire sectors that had once existed only as uncertain fragments within ancient maps were now firmly integrated into Imperial territory. Fleets traveled constantly along the new warp routes opened by Imperial navigators, carrying armies, settlers, and supplies between systems that had once been separated by centuries of isolation. Occasionally, those routes brought vessels close to the boundaries of the quarantine system. Such encounters were rare but inevitable. The Imperium's expansion was vast, and the Forgotten Star lay not far from several corridors that had grown increasingly active as new regions were brought into compliance. Whenever an Imperial ship approached the outer perimeter, the patrol fleet responded immediately. Encrypted transmissions were sent instructing the vessel to alter course. No explanation was offered. Most captains obeyed without hesitation. In the disciplined structure of the Crusade, unexplained orders were not unusual. Strategic considerations often required fleets to avoid certain regions of space for reasons known only to high command. But one such encounter would become the most unusual event recorded since the discovery of the Silent World. It began when a long-range patrol frigate detected a vessel translating from a warp near the outer boundary of the system. The ship was small, far smaller than the warships typically assigned to Crusade fleets. Its profile matched that of an independent exploration craft, the kind often used by surveyors mapping newly discovered routes. The patrol fleet transmitted the standard warning: alter course immediately. Do not approach the inner system. At first, the vessel appeared to comply. Its engine shifted, and its trajectory began moving away from the forbidden region. But then something unexpected occurred. The forgotten world responded. For centuries, the pulses beneath the planet had followed their slow and predictable cycle. Their timing had remained stable, their intensity consistent. Even the subtle variations detected by the Mechanicum had never strayed far from the established pattern. Now, for the first time in recorded history, that pattern changed abruptly. The next pulse did not arrive gradually. It surged. Instruments aboard the observation drones registered a sudden spike in electromagnetic activity originating from the Barrett complex. The signal expanded outward through the planet's magnetic field with a strength far greater than any previous measurement. Within seconds, the disturbance spread across the entire system. The patrol fleet sensors filled with cascading data as the energy wave moved through the surrounding space. Communications channels crackled with interference, forcing several ships to temporarily shift to backup systems. The exploration vessel near the system's edge halted its maneuver entirely. Its engines went silent. Its signal lights remained active, but no further attempts to leave the region were detected. The patrol commander immediately ordered a full sensor sweep. What the fleet discovered was deeply unsettling. The ancient insulation beneath the forgotten world had not simply increased the strength of its pulse. The signal had changed form. Embedded within the electromagnetic surge was something new. A pattern. It was faint, nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding energy fluctuations, but the Mechanicum's instruments detected it almost immediately. The buried structure was transmitting information, not a language in any known sense, not a message directed toward a receiver, but a structured signal nonetheless. For hours, the fleet's data processors attempted to interpret the transmission. Every known method of signal analysis was applied in rapid succession, yet none produced a clear result. The pattern was too vast, too complex. Its structure seemed to operate across multiple layers of mathematical sequences, far beyond the limits of any communication system ever constructed by human engineers. And yet, one detail became clear almost immediately. The signal was not random. It was responding. Specifically, it appeared to be responding to the presence of the newly arrived vessel. The patrol commander ordered a direct transmission to the exploration craft, demanding identification and immediate withdrawal from the region. Several attempts were made before a reply was finally received. The response was brief and confused. The vessel's captain reported severe interference across all navigational systems. Their engines had shut down without warning, and the ship's machine spirits refused to accept new commands. They were drifting, and every attempt to restart their propulsion systems had failed. Within the quarantine system, the energy pulses beneath the planet continued to intensify. The signal repeated again and again, each surge spreading outward through space like a distant echo of something far older than the Imperium itself. The Mechanicum adept studied the readings with growing concern. Whatever the buried installation was doing, it had clearly detected the presence of something in the system. And for the first time since the planet's discovery, it had chosen to react. Above the forests and ruins of the silent world, the observation drones recorded the shifting electromagnetic storm while the patrol fleet struggled to maintain stable communications. Far below the surface, the ancient complex continued its transmission, its pulses growing stronger, its patterns unfolding in sequences no human mind could yet understand. And somewhere within the depths of that buried machine, something had awakened just enough to notice that it was no longer alone beneath the stars. The events of the sudden transmission reverberated silently throughout the patrol fleet. Though no ship had been lost, and no lives were directly threatened, the implications of what had occurred weighed heavily on every officer present. Across the centuries of human expansion, fleets were accustomed to navigating dangerous warp currents, unpredictable alien encounters, and planetary systems hostile to human life. But this was something different. This was a system whose danger lay not in its surface, nor in conventional weaponry, nor in any threat that could be fought with men or machines. The peril was subtle, pervasive, and incomprehensible. The signal beneath the abandoned city had surged once, and in doing so, it had demonstrated agency. Its pulses were no longer merely a rhythm to be observed. They had reacted. They had chosen a course of action. This realization was recorded meticulously in the logs by the Mechanicum, who treated it with a cautious mixture of awe and fear. For all their centuries of technological mastery, the adepts admitted privately that they lacked the language to describe the scale, complexity, and purpose of what lay below. Within the fleet, the senior officers debated the implications. Some argued that the system should be sealed entirely from all future passage, its location further obfuscated in the Imperial records. Others suggested that the response might have been a one-time reaction, triggered only by the sudden intrusion of a vessel into its outer perimeter. But the Emperor's original command echoed in their minds: forget this world. Do not interfere. Leave it undisturbed. And so, despite the anomaly, the decision was made to maintain the existing course. Observation would continue. The quarantine would remain. No landing parties would descend. No exploration drones would breach the forested surface, and the buried complex would remain untouched. The following months passed with a tense rhythm. The patrol fleet maintained orbital circuits around the system, recording data as usual, while the Mechanicum processed the enormous volumes of information collected during the surge. The logs contained more anomalies than had ever been previously observed. Minor shifts in energy pulses, subtle fluctuations in planetary magnetics, and variations in the electromagnetic field suggested that the underground installation had stabilized, but only temporarily. Each measurement hinted at intelligence, deliberate calculation, and an awareness of surrounding stellar environment. Above the forests and silent cities, the wind moved slowly across rooftops now softened by centuries of overgrowth. The buildings that had been carefully abandoned by the vanished population were gradually succumbing to the patient reclamation of nature. Trees grew through avenues once clear and orderly. Vines wrapped around towers and walls, binding the remains of human architecture into a new form of living, breathing structure. The surface was no longer entirely recognizable as a city, yet the underlying geometric symmetry remained detectable to those who knew what to look for. Below this canopy, the pulses continued. Each new fluctuation, though subtler than the surge, hinted at a system both vast and deliberate. Layers of sequences moved within the signal, as though multiple processes were unfolding simultaneously in parallel, independent yet interconnected. The Mechanicum referred to the readings as stratified harmonics, an analogy that poorly conveyed the true scale of the phenomenon. Even the most advanced analytical tools could only interpret fragments of the pattern before the signal itself moved beyond detection thresholds. For those stationed in orbit, the quiet that followed the surge was more unsettling than the event itself. Nothing moved on the surface. No new structures appeared. No energy signatures of human origin emerged. Yet the underlying pulse persisted, persistent in its silent watch. It had, in a sense, awakened, and the consciousness of its presence was now an unspoken weight over the fleet. Officers found themselves walking the corridors of their ships with an awareness that something beyond human understanding existed beneath them. A subtle vigilance settled into their routines. Every sensor sweep, every orbital survey, every data analysis was conducted with the understanding that the installation beneath the world could respond again at any moment. Months turned into years, and the fleet continued its cycles. Crews changed, adepts rotated, and the world slowly aged. Even as the Crusade advanced into distant regions of the galaxy, the Forgotten System remained fixed in its orbit, a quiet anomaly that did not shift with the tides of conquest. The Mechanicum occasionally speculated, in private correspondence, about the function of the buried structure. Some suggested it was a remnant of an ancient pre-human intelligence, a device older than Terra itself. Others believed it might be tied to planetary or even stellar systems, a mechanism regulating natural forces on a scale too vast for conventional comprehension. Still, these were conjectures, never acted upon. The Emperor's command was absolute, and no curiosity, however well-founded, could override it. And so, centuries after the first survey teams had walked the abandoned streets, the world remained a place outside of Imperial memory. It existed only in restricted archives, in encrypted logs, and in the quiet recollections of those few officers who had witnessed it firsthand. Above the forests and ruins, the drones continued their slow circuits. Their sensors measured the faint pulses that still rose from the planet's depths. The forests whispered in the wind. Shadows lengthened over broken streets and collapsed towers. And somewhere, far beneath the surface, the ancient installation carried out its purpose, indifferent to the passing centuries and the rise of empires above it. The galaxy moved forward. The Great Crusade expanded, and humanity's dominion stretched across countless worlds. Battles were fought, colonies were reclaimed, and the Imperium's authority was woven steadily into the fabric of the stars. Yet in the Forgotten System, one small planet continued its quiet vigil. Its cities, empty and overgrown, watched the slow turning of the heavens. Its buried structure, ancient and deliberate, pulsed steadily through the magnetic field, marking the rhythm of a presence older than memory. The patrol fleet maintained its orbit, as it had for generations. Observation continued, never ceasing, and the planet waited, patient and silent, beneath the infinite stars, holding its secret beneath layers of stone, forest, and shadow, while the Imperium moved ever onward, unaware of the quiet intelligence that had endured beyond history itself. The centuries that followed the initial discovery of the forgotten world brought a rhythm that seemed almost eternal. Within the Imperium, the Great Crusade pressed ever forward. Star systems were reclaimed, lost human colonies reintegrated, and humanity's dominion over the stars expanded with inexorable precision. In these distant reaches of space, fleets moved ceaselessly along warped corridors, carrying armies, administrators, and supplies to countless worlds. Yet amidst the unfolding campaigns and the relentless march of conquest, the quarantine system remained untouched, an anomaly preserved in silence. Within the patrol fleet, generations of officers and adepts rotated through duty, each bringing fresh eyes but the same strict discipline. The mission had never changed. Observation without interference, recording without intrusion, maintaining the Emperor's command that this world, its cities, and its subterranean installation must remain undisturbed. Some officers wondered, at first, why a world so silent and so isolated required such attention. Yet the more data they gathered, the clearer it became that the forgotten planet was no ordinary anomaly. The Mechanicum's records, carefully encrypted and transmitted through secure channels, grew in depth and volume with each passing decade. The energy pulses beneath the surface, once thought to be simple rhythmic phenomena, had revealed layers of complexity that defied conventional understanding. Each pulse, while consistent in its broad pattern, contained subtle modulations, intricate structures woven into the signal that suggested deliberate design. The installation was no machine built for labor or communication as humanity knew it. It was something far older, far more precise, and operating on scales beyond comprehension. Observation drones, upgraded over generations, traced the faint distortions and harmonics that rippled through the magnetic field above the Barrett complex. With each technological advancement, more detail became accessible, yet the installation itself remained inscrutable. Attempts to penetrate its deepest levels encountered forces that seemed to resist understanding, as though the structure had been constructed not merely to endure, but to conceal. Even the Mechanicum, masters of technology both ancient and contemporary, admitted privately that the purpose of the installation could only be speculated upon, never confirmed. Above the overgrown cities, the surface of the planet continued its slow transformation. Centuries of neglect had allowed nature to reclaim its place. Trees now obscured entire districts, and vines crept across the facade of towers that had once been the pride of a vanished civilization. Plazas were filled with undergrowth, and streets, once carefully maintained, became narrow corridors of vegetation. Even the largest structures gradually succumbed to erosion and decay. Yet the geometric layout of the city still hinted of the intelligence that had once built it, a faint reminder of a culture erased by time and unknown forces. Beneath this quiet surface, the installation persisted, a hidden heart of deliberate function. Its energy pulses remained steady, but minute variations in timing and intensity suggested observation, analysis, and perhaps calculation. The Mechanicum's adepts catalogued these fluctuations, noting correlations with distant stellar movements, shifts in local magnetic fields, and subtle anomalies in gravitational patterns. Slowly, a pattern emerged, though its full meaning remained beyond human comprehension. The installation was not merely present. It was aware. For centuries, the patrol fleet maintained its disciplined watch. Ships came and went, crews rotated through assignments, and technologies advanced. The officers began to recognize a subtle truth. The installation was ancient and deliberate, a force operating according to laws and purposes that had long ceased to be intelligible to the species now inhabiting the stars. Their observation, though meticulous, contributed only fragments to a puzzle too vast for the human mind. In this realization lay both fascination and unease. The Imperium had encountered countless worlds, civilizations, and technologies over the course of the Crusade, yet few mysteries demanded such patience and reverence. Even the surface cities, overgrown and quiet, seemed to bear witness to the passage of time with solemn endurance. Occasionally, faint architectural patterns would reveal themselves from orbital scans, suggesting that the original inhabitants had built their streets and plazas with some understanding of the vast installation below. Perhaps they had known, perhaps they had feared, perhaps they had worshipped it in some forgotten form. Their disappearance remained a question unanswered, their decision to erase their history now lost to both memory and imperial records. The signal, the structure, the forest, and the ruins existed together in a delicate balance. One could not observe without affecting the other, yet all persisted. The planet's quiet was not empty. It was full of measured activity, subtle but deliberate, operating on scales far beyond the reach of any observer. And the patrol fleet, bound by duty and the Emperor's command, remained the only human presence permitted within its orbit, a silent witness to a process older than most history. Above the forest and beneath the stars, the world turned slowly on its axis, silent yet alive with hidden motion. The Barrett installation continued its unceasing cycles, unbroken by the centuries of human attention above it. The Imperium, vast and expanding, carried on with its conquest, unaware of the full extent of the mystery it had chosen to preserve. And so the forgotten world persisted, a testament to the endurance of what cannot be known, a presence older than memory, unbroken by time. The patrol fleet maintained its vigil, the Mechanicum recorded every pulse, and the silent planet remained a secret in the vastness of space, awaiting a future that might never arrive, while the galaxy continued its inexorable march onward. The forgotten world continued its quiet turning beneath the distant star, centuries of silent orbit passing with imperceptible weight. Above its forested cities and overgrown avenues, the patrol fleet maintained the same measured orbit it had held for generations, its vessels gliding through space with precision born of discipline and duty. To the fleets of the Great Crusade, such continuity was not unusual. The Imperium's expansion demanded order, vigilance, and patience. Yet here, the constancy was of a different kind. There were no victories to report, no colonies to integrate, no banners to raise. There was only observation, unceasing, deliberate, and absolute. Within the fleet, officers and adepts rotated with the passing years. Crews aged, passed on, and were replaced, and each new generation inherited the same knowledge, the same instructions, and the same silence. Observe without interference. Record without intrusion. Guard the Emperor's command to forget. The world's cities, abandoned and slowly surrendered to nature, became an unchanging backdrop for an operation that was as much about patience as it was about vigilance. The energy pulses beneath the surface remained as inscrutable as ever, initially recorded as simple fluctuations in the planet's electromagnetic field. They had revealed subtle structures and patterns over decades of careful study. The Mechanicum had meticulously catalogued these variations, noting relationships to the movements of nearby stellar bodies, correlations with magnetic anomalies, and minor gravitational shifts. From this, a realization slowly emerged. The installation was vast, deliberate, and operating on principles that no human mind could fully comprehend. It was not merely a machine, it was something aware of its environment, attuned to forces beyond its own world, and, in its own manner, patient. Observation drones flew continuously above the forests and ruined cities, maintaining a careful survey of both surface and atmospheric conditions. Each new generation of drone incorporated enhancements to its sensory array, allowing the Mechanicum to monitor with increasing fidelity the delicate fluctuations of the installation. Yet every attempt to penetrate the deepest layers of the buried complex met resistance, not through weapons, but through some subtle interference of a kind that human technology could not overcome. It was as though the installation actively maintained concealment of its deepest chambers, preserving the secret of its purpose beyond reach. The surface of the world continued to transform under the slow march of time. Trees spread across plazas, weaving roots through streets that had once carried countless feet. Vines climbed over towers, binding walls and supports into living structures of intertwined stone and plant. Streams redirected by centuries of neglect cut new courses across former avenues, carrying sediment through plazas and courtyards. Birds nested among towers long empty of human life, and wildlife claimed districts that had once been carefully managed by a vanished civilization. The planet was alive, though human presence had long disappeared, and the ruins were slowly receding into the dominance of nature. Despite these transformations, the geometric order of the city remained faintly perceptible from orbit. Straight avenues now interrupted by trees, towers partially collapsed, and bridges broken or buried still revealed the careful design of the vanished population. It was as though the surface civilization had built not in opposition to the buried complex, but around it, acknowledging a presence they had understood but perhaps never named. How they had perceived it, or why they had abandoned the cities, remained mysteries locked in time and shadow. Periodically, distant vessels approached the quarantine system, drawn by the gravitational irregularities or miscalculated warp jumps. Each time, the installation's energy pulses reacted, subtly shifting patterns or increasing intensity. The patrol fleet intercepted these vessels, guiding them away with standard warnings and the enforcement of quarantine. None ventured deeper, for the interference from the installation affected navigation and machinery, subtly discouraging approach. The system's guardians, over decades, came to recognize that this reaction was neither random nor violent, but deliberate, a measure of the installation's awareness of intruders and its influence across its immediate surroundings. The Mechanicum recorded every fluctuation. Analysts debated interpretations in restricted chambers aboard the fleet's vessels, careful to avoid speculation that might challenge the Emperor's mandate. There were discussions of pre-human technology, systems older than recorded history, and mechanisms that might operate across planetary or stellar scales. None could be confirmed, and none were ever acted upon beyond observation. The installation remained a secret, a silent presence that had endured through millennia, untouched by human ambition. For the officers and adepts stationed in orbit, life became measured by cycles of observation. Months of routine data collection were punctuated by rare anomalies, minute shifts in pulse strength, variations in electromagnetic rhythm, or sudden surges when the fleet's perimeter was approached. Each event reminded them of the scale and intelligence of what they were watching. They were not merely guarding a planet. They were custodians of a secret older than most civilizations, a presence whose influence extended beyond an immediate world. Even as the Imperium spread its dominion across thousands of systems, bringing unity and structure to humanity's scattered domains, the forgotten planet remained outside history. Its surface, forests, and ruins evolved slowly, oblivious to the triumphs and tragedies of distant worlds. Its buried complex continued its patient operation, its pulses threading through the magnetic field, responding to forces humans could barely perceive, measuring, adjusting, and enduring. The patrol fleet maintained its orbit without pause. Drones circled above the ruins. Instruments recorded each subtle fluctuation, and the Mechanicum catalogued centuries of meticulous data. The Emperor's command, absolute and unyielding, ensured that no interference would occur, and that the world would remain erased from memory. Beneath the forests, under layers of soil and stone, the ancient installation persisted. Its purpose remained a mystery, but its presence was undeniable, a patient, measured rhythm, continuing unbroken through centuries and untouched by the passing of generations. The galaxy surged forward in conquest and exploration, yet here, in a system erased from history, one world remained beyond understanding, quietly observing the slow passage of time while the Imperium marched ever onward, unaware of the silent intelligence beneath the forests and ruins. The forgotten world had long ceased to register in the calculations of most Imperial navigators. Its coordinates existed only in sealed, encrypted charts, accessible solely to the patrol fleets assigned to maintain the Emperor's command. For centuries, it had turned quietly around its distant sun, a silent sentinel in a sector of space increasingly filled with human activity. Entire systems had been explored, claimed, and organized. Fleets surged from star to star, carrying soldiers, settlers, and administrators, yet this one world remained untouched, preserved by decree and by the enduring vigilance of those who orbited above it. To those who served within the fleet, life had become measured in observation. Every instrument aboard every ship, every sensor aboard each drone, was tuned to detect the faintest variation in the planet's electromagnetic field, the slightest shift in the subterranean pulses that rose steadily from the depths. The Mechanicum's records, spanning centuries, had grown impossibly vast, yet contained only fragments of understanding. Each pulse, each fluctuation, was meticulously logged, yet the meaning behind them remained entirely unknown. There was order in the observation, but no clarity. Beneath the overgrown cities, the buried installation persisted. Its chambers extended far below the ruins, far beyond the reach of the most advanced sensors. Every attempt to probe the deepest levels encountered resistance, subtle, non-violent, and precise. The structure seemed to preserve itself, not against intruders in conventional sense, but against comprehension. Its energy pulses followed patterns that responded to distant stellar movements, to shifts in local magnetics, and occasionally to the presence of ships near the system's outer edge. For the Mechanicum, it was a puzzle beyond imagination, a system alive with purpose, yet inscrutable. On the surface, centuries of abandonment had allowed nature to reclaim the cities. Forests thickened over plazas, trees pushed through once clear avenues, and vines wrapped towers in living lattices. Streams carved new paths through broken streets, carrying sediment into old courtyards. The city had become less an artifact of human habitation and more quiet ecosystem, one that moved to a rhythm older than the colonies of the Great Crusade. Only from careful orbital analysis could the geometric regularity of the vanished civilization be discerned, a faint echo of human design overlaying the planet's hidden heart. The patrol fleet maintained orbit with methodical precision. Every ship followed strict patterns of observation. Every drone circled the skies above the forested ruins. Every measurement was logged, encrypted, and transmitted through secure channels. Orders arrived rarely, and only to reaffirm the original directive: observe without interference, record without intrusion, maintain the Emperor's command that this world remain forgotten. Such repetition, over centuries, created a culture among the crews, one of patient vigilance, where curiosity was contained and discipline absolute. Occasionally, small fleets or solitary vessels approached the quarantine system. They were drawn by minor stellar anomalies, navigation errors, or curiosity beyond their understanding. Each time, the installation's pulses responded, not with aggression, but with influence. Navigation systems would fail. Communications would falter. Engines would hesitate. The vessels rarely approached closely, and those that did were gently guided away by the patrol fleet. Even in these subtle interactions, it became clear that the buried structure observed not only the world itself but its broader environment, monitoring movement and responding with deliberate precision. Within the fleet, discussions among the Mechanicum grew increasingly cautious. The structure beneath the planet could not be classified as any human design. Its scale, precision, and responsiveness suggested intelligence, or at least something functionally indistinguishable from it. Some adepts speculated that it predated humanity entirely, a remnant of civilizations or forces long erased from memory. Others considered that it might be attuned to forces imperceptible to contemporary understanding, energies of stellar magnitude, cosmic rhythms, or the slow tides of warp currents in the sector. Yet all conclusions were speculative, and none could be confirmed. The officers and adepts who lived their lives within orbit became accustomed to a quiet tension. Life on the ships moved forward, maintenance, drills, study, and patrol. Yet beneath every calculation and observation lay the unspoken awareness of something vast and old, operating with a patient and deliberate will. The fleet's routines were punctuated only by the rare anomaly, the faint surge, or the subtle shift in the installation's pulse, reminders that beneath the surface, time itself was measured differently. The surface of the world continued to evolve slowly, unobserved by human eyes. Trees reshaped avenues. Bridges crumbled into the earth. Streams changed direction as centuries of sediment altered riverbeds. The forest claimed the ruins with quiet persistence. Birds nested in towers. Animals roamed streets now hidden by vegetation. And the planet, once populated by human life, became a place where the only activity visible from orbit was the soft sway of foliage in the wind. Yet beneath this quiet exterior, the installation remained active. Each pulse moved with meticulous regularity, yet included subtle modulations hinting at awareness, measurement, and purpose. The Mechanicum recorded every variation, constructing models that could not fully capture the scale or intricacy of the design. Every analysis, every report, returned to the same unsettling truth. The structure was deliberate, immense, and alive with processes beyond human comprehension. And so the centuries passed. The Imperium marched onward, consolidating new worlds and extending its reach into previously unknown regions. Fleets surged across the stars, battles were won and lost, and yet, in one small sector, one quiet system remained untouched. The patrol fleet continued its endless observation. The forests, ruins, and buried complex persisted together, each element interacting with the other in a balance that had endured far longer than human memory. Above the hidden depths, the world turned slowly beneath its distant sun, silent and steadfast. The patrol fleet maintained its vigil. The Mechanicum recorded its data, and the buried installation pulsed patiently, measuring, responding, and enduring, as it had since long before humanity first spread among the stars, a sentinel beneath a surface that had been abandoned and forgotten. Time moved on, empires rose, fleets advanced, and civilizations expanded. Yet in this system, beneath layers of stone, soil, and forest, one presence persisted, a quiet, deliberate rhythm that no one could alter, and that the Imperium had been commanded to forget. The forgotten world continued its patient turn beneath the distant sun, centuries of silent observation passing like shadows across its forests and abandoned cities. Above its surface, the patrol fleet maintained the same methodical patterns of orbit, a web of disciplined paths traced across the void. Ships rotated through assignments as generations of officers and Mechanicum adepts came and went, each assuming the duty of silent vigilance without ever breaching the Emperor's command. Observation, recording, and containment defined their existence, and over time, that rhythm became indistinguishable from the pulse of the installation below. The buried structure had long ceased to resemble any design known to humanity. Layers of chambers, conduits, and energy conduits extended far deeper than senses could penetrate. Each pulse measured from orbit revealed complexity beyond comprehension. Stratified sequences within sequences, harmonics interwoven with variations responding to distant stellar movements, and modulations that suggested awareness of the fleet itself. The Mechanicum, despite centuries of study, had yet to form a complete model, and none of their theories had been able to account for the system's resilience or deliberate concealment. Above the surface, nature continued its patient reclamation of the abandoned cities. Towering structures, once carefully constructed by human hands, had been softened and reshaped by centuries of wind, rain, and root. Streets that had once carried populations now channeled streams through moss-covered stones, and trees had broken the geometry of avenues with sprawling roots. Birds nested in ruins, small animals roamed freely, and the city had become more ecosystem than artifact. Yet careful orbital scanning still revealed faint echoes of human intent, subtle traces of a civilization that had vanished but left behind signs of meticulous design. The patrol fleet operated with unyielding precision. Drones maintained their circuits above the forest, sensor scanning for the slightest anomaly, while the Mechanicum recorded every pulse, fluctuation, and energy spike. Every report was encrypted, catalogued, and transmitted through secure channels to restricted archives under Terra's authority. Orders had never changed. The world was to remain forgotten. Observation alone was mandated, and no further action was to be taken. Discipline enforced this command, though curiosity and unease persisted quietly among those who served. Occasionally, vessels approached the system's outer bounds, survey ships, merchant vessels, or explorers miscalculating warp coordinates. Each time, the buried installation responded. Its pulses shifted in intensity, subtle modulations interfered with navigational instruments, and communications could falter unpredictably. The patrol fleet intercepted these intrusions, guiding ships away without incident, but the phenomenon demonstrated that the installation's awareness extended beyond its immediate surface. It was not simply a planetary mechanism. It engaged with the surrounding space, responding to the movement of objects and the presence of observers in a calculated, deliberate manner. Within the fleet, Mechanicum adepts debated what might lie beneath the surface. Some proposed that the installation predated humanity itself, a remnant of an unknown civilization or of natural forces engineered with intelligence beyond comprehension. Others considered that its design might operate on cosmic scales, interacting with stellar and magnetic phenomena far beyond the system. Each theory was met with caution. None could be confirmed. The Emperor's command forbade interference, leaving the observers to measure and record, always returning to the same unsettling realization. This structure was deliberate, ancient, and intelligent in ways no human mind could fully understand. Even as a great crusade pressed across thousands of star systems, bringing unity and structure to humanity's scattered dominions, the quarantine system remained untouched. Empires expanded. Fleets surged across the galaxy, and colonies flourished on distant worlds. Yet this small star remained in isolation, erased from memory, its cities slowly reclaimed by forest and time. To the fleet, the system became a study in constancy. The pulse, the forest, and the ruins remained in an equilibrium maintained for centuries, a balance that neither human presence nor natural processes disturbed. The energy pulses beneath the surface remained a subtle, unbroken rhythm, modulated with variations that suggested observation and measurement. Analysts aboard the fleet's vessels noted that the patterns occasionally aligned with minute shifts in the magnetic field, minor gravitational perturbations, and disturbances in the energy output of neighboring stars. The structure seemed not only aware of its own state but attuned to the wider stellar environment. Its calculations extended far beyond the planet itself, functioning on scales that dwarfed the fleets and colonies orbiting distant stars. Life aboard the ships continued with quiet precision. Officers executed drills, recorded measurements, and maintained the fleet's instruments with careful diligence. Crews aged and departed. Adepts rotated in and out of assignments, and each new generation inherited the same responsibility. They became accustomed to the slow, almost meditative rhythm of their duty, the unchanging constancy of the world below mirrored in their daily routines. The installation beneath the forest pulsed steadily, imperceptibly interacting with the fleet's presence, while the surface evolved gradually under the patient reclamation of nature. Above the silent forest, the patrol fleet orbited with disciplined constancy, drones tracing their paths while sensors monitored the hidden pulses below. The Emperor's command ensured that the world remained a secret, untouched by human ambition or curiosity beyond observation. And beneath layers of soil, stone, and ancient forests, the installation endured, patient, deliberate, and aware, measuring the slow passage of centuries as the galaxy marched onward, unaware of the quiet intelligence that persisted beneath a world humanity was ordered to forget. Time moved differently in the quarantine system. Centuries of Imperial observation had passed, yet the planet below seemed indifferent to the march of human history. The patrol fleet continued its orbit as it always had, tracing precise circuits above the overgrown cities and forested avenues, maintaining observation without interference. Ships rotated through the duty, new crews taking the place of those who had grown old and departed, yet each arrived with the same instructions: record, observe, and preserve the secrecy of a world humanity was forbidden to remember. Discipline ensured compliance, but curiosity lingered quietly, tempered by the unyielding authority of the Emperor's command. Beneath the surface, the ancient installation persisted. Its network of subterranean chambers, tunnels, and energy conduits stretched far deeper than any scanner could penetrate. Every pulse, each subtle modulation, had long been recorded and catalogued by the Mechanicum, but understanding remained elusive. The structure did not merely exist. It calculated, responded, and adjusted, attuned to changes within the system, aware of vessels in the outer perimeter, and sensitive to variations in stellar and magnetic fields. Its intelligence, deliberate and measured, operated on scales that dwarf human comprehension. The forests above the ruins of the abandoned cities had grown thick and resilient over the centuries. Trees intertwined with broken towers, vines enveloped the remains of structures once carefully constructed, and streams redirected themselves across streets now softened by sediment and root. Animals roamed freely, reclaiming spaces once dominated by human life, while the geometric patterns of the city remained faintly perceptible to orbital sensors, subtle echoes of the civilization that had vanished. The surface transformed slowly, yet the installation beneath persisted without change, a quiet heart of deliberate design. The patrol fleet maintained its vigil. Drones traced their circuits continuously, sensors scanning for even the faintest anomaly, and all data were transmitted through encrypted channels to restricted archives. The Emperor's command remained absolute: observe without interference, record without action, preserve the secrecy of the system. Officers and adepts carried out this work with quiet diligence, understanding that the greatest danger was not in direct confrontation, but in disturbing a structure whose design predated all human knowledge. Occasionally, ships approached from outside the system, drawn by navigational errors or stellar anomalies. Each time, the installation responded. Navigation systems fluctuated, engines hesitated, and communications faltered, subtly discouraging intrusion. The patrol fleet intercepted the vessels, guiding them away without explanation. These events demonstrated that the structure's awareness extended beyond its immediate environment. It monitored, evaluated, and interacted with the space surrounding the planet, operating with intelligence and purpose while remaining untouchable and unknowable to those observing. The Mechanicum continued to analyze centuries of data. Their records were vast, containing layered sequences within sequences, subtle harmonics, and interactions tied to distant stellar phenomena. Models grew ever more intricate, yet each new discovery only reinforced a sense of scale and precision beyond human understanding. The installation's pattern suggested processes that were neither random nor mechanical in conventional sense, yet there was no evidence of malevolence. It was deliberate, patient, and eternal, a mind without form, hidden beneath the forests and ruins of a planet erased from memory. Life aboard the fleet remained steady. Officers conducted drills, maintained instruments, and recorded every measurement with careful attention. Crews rotated in and out, yet the rhythm of duty persisted unchanged. Observation became a meditation, each measurement a silent conversation with the unknown intelligence beneath the planet. Those who spent their lives in the system became attuned to the slow, imperceptible fluctuations in the pulses, understanding their persistence and constancy as a form of awareness that was at once alien and familiar. The surface of the world continued its gradual transformation. Forests expanded, streams carved new courses, and towers collapsed further into soil and root. The geometry of the abandoned city persisted only in faint echoes detectable from orbit, a reminder of the civilization that had vanished without explanation. The interplay of nature and ruin was complete. Yet beneath it all, the buried installation endured, precise and unbroken, its pulses threading through the magnetic field with unwavering regularity. Even as the Imperium advanced across thousands of systems, bringing unity and authority to countless worlds, the quarantined planet remained untouched and unknown. Its secret endured, preserved not only by human obedience but by the installation's own subtle influence. The world had become a silent sanctuary, a place beyond conquest and beyond comprehension, where time was measured differently, and presence itself was defined by observation rather than action. Above the forests and ruins, the patrol fleet continued its orbit, tracing the same powers generation after generation. Drones circled ceaselessly, instruments measured each pulse, and the Mechanicum recorded every anomaly, every subtle variation in the installation's activity. The Emperor's command remained the unbroken law, and the system existed as it had for centuries, a quiet, deliberate presence, observed but untouched, measured but not understood. Beneath layers of stone, soil, and forest, the installation persisted. Its pulses moved with steady precision, responding to forces imperceptible to human senses, calculating, measuring, and enduring. The forests, the ruins, and the world itself became vessels of patient continuity, while the galaxy beyond surged with war, conquest, and ambition. And in this one forgotten system, the vigil remained eternal, a quiet testament to what endures when civilizations rise and fall, when empires expand and collapse, and when the Emperor's command safeguards a secret too vast, too deliberate, and too ancient to ever be known. In the silent turning of the world beneath distant stars, the installation continued its work, patient and unbroken. The fleet maintained its watch. Observation and record persisted, and the forgotten planet, with its forests, ruins, and subterranean heart, remained exactly as it had always been, a secret in the infinite night of the galaxy, eternal, measured, and waiting.